So with everything that's going on over the past few months and with sports entities trying to increase diversity within the ranks, a lot of questions have been raised about the lack of Black, Asian, and minority ethnic coaches across Europe's top 5 leagues. So what about African coaches? Where do they fall into this? Now, believe it or not, Africans have taken part in European football since the 1880s. The first was Arthur Wharton, who was born in Ghana, but you even had Egyptian aristocrats like Hussein Hegazi playing for Fulham in 1911. And over the last 150 years, we've had Africans helping European nations to World Cups, we've had them winning Ballon d'Ors, we've had them scoring in Champions League finals. They've basically become superstars in their own right. You only really need to look at the Premier League over the last few years and you'll realize how many African superstars play in the world game. Riyad Mahrez, Sadio Mane, Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, Hakim Ziyech, and the list goes on and on and on and on. And despite the success of Africans in European football, never has an African coach been given a permanent job in one of Europe's top 5 leagues. The question we're going to try to answer today is why? The first problem that pops up is a lack of certification. To coach in one of Europe's top 5 leagues, you need to have what's called a UEFA Pro license certification. Now, we're not going to get into the details of the Pro license course, but it's important to note that the Asian Football Confederation has an equivalent with UEFA, and so does CONMEBOL in South America. And so coaches from both of those regions have been able to get their certification at home and are ready to apply for the job when it opens up. In Africa, the Confederation of African Football only really put in place a pro coaching license in 2018. And the reasons why it took so long are diverse. Some people that I've spoken to that are within the annals of African football have chalked it up to straight up incompetence. I mean, to operate a course like this, it can cost anywhere from £8,000 for a single participant. And you're talking about 200 to 300 hours of course in theory and practice. Now, £8,000, that's really a minuscule amount for, a top coach in a top European league to pay for their certification. But for many, many African coaches across the continent, that's a lot of money. But the good news is that CAF have now put in place the system where coaches can eventually get some kind of equivalence to the UEFA Pro coaching license. A second obstacle that a lot of African coaches face is that there's really a lack of diversity in the boardrooms of European football clubs. Now, that is changing at the very, very top, where you have, for example, a lot of Arab owners of major clubs in Europe. But when it comes to sporting directors and the people that are really recruiting and a lot of intermediaries like agents, we're still talking about people of one nationality who don't necessarily have the reflex of looking to an African coach first. Now, some leagues are doing things to remedy that. For example, the English Football League has instituted the Rooney Rule, which they sort of copied from the NFL. And basically what that says is that if a vacancy opens up, you have to at least interview one Black, Asian, minority ethnic candidate for that job. And what that really does is it's not necessarily forcing anybody to hire a BAME coach, but what it does is that it at least forces you to take a look and see if there are any qualified candidates. Greenwich University actually published a study in 2019 that actually stated that the Rooney Rule had been unsuccessful throughout the first year, but I believe that the English Football League are now instituting changes so that it can be implemented more correctly. I actually spoke to a coach in the 2nd division in England. He coaches one of the youth teams, and he was actually quite disappointed in some of the ownership because now we do have minority representation in ownership. And he brought up the case of Aston Villa, who has actually Egyptian owners, but for some reason they haven't really been at the forefront of recruiting that first African coach. And that really shows you that it's more of a systemic problem than anything else. So is it just a problem of maybe there not being a trend? Are African coaches just not fashionable? L'Equipe, which is a French broadsheet newspaper, actually wrote a really interesting report a few months back about the lack of French coaches in top 5 European leagues. Besides Zinedine Zidane, there are no other French coaches coaching outside of France in the top 5 European league, which I found quite incredible. Instead, they pointed to a trend of the Portuguese coach being quite popular or being quite trendy. So why are Portuguese coaches the in trend at the moment? Look, it all comes down to sporting directors and agents / intermediaries. When some of these major clubs are trying to sign major players, they'll sometimes bring on big name intermediaries and agents who will run the club's affairs through proxies as sporting directors, and they're usually going to bring in clients or at least people they know and trust to run the club. And as a result, a lot of African coaches don't have that sort of network in place, with the A-list agents and so on and so forth. And so they may be overlooked. And that's another example of how this is more of a systemic problem than anything else. So how do we break this glass ceiling and how do we move on? I believe that we're closer to resolving this problem than not. And it's really going to come from one of two profiles. The first is really like a world-class name, a former football player that really the wider European public is familiar with and trusts. Somebody like a Samuel Eto'o who said he wanted to coach Michael Essien, who I believe is coaching right now as a player coach in Azerbaijan. Or even Kolo Touré at Leicester City, who's an assistant for Brendan Rodgers. These are coaches that are sort of proving their worth, taking it slow, and who are such big names that really they would be trusted by the wider European public. But there's actually a second profile, and that's a dual citizen coach. So right now there's actually a few dual citizen coaches, players with African heritage that were actually born in European countries that have the certification necessary but are paying their dues in Africa, and they're doing a really great job. And the first two names that come to mind, Aliou Cissé, Djemal Belmadi. Aliou Cissé, who's trusted by French football fans because he played for Paris Saint-Germain, trusted by English football fans, Portsmouth, a lot of different clubs. Trilingual, speaks Wolof, French and English. Just really calming demeanor, and he's had fantastic results with the Senegalese national team, taking them to the World Cup in 2018, taking them to the final of the 2019 Cup of Nations. And I've had the chance to go to these Cup of Nations and see him work in person, and he has such a calming demeanor. He's very close to his players, to the supporters. He really is a player's manager, and I believe that he could be one of the first to break the glass ceiling. And the second is Djemal Belmadi, who, like Aliou Cissé, is trilingual, so he speaks Arabic, French, English. Born in France, played for huge clubs like Paris Saint-Germain, played for Marseille, played for Southampton, Manchester City as well. But he had to prove his dues in Qatar with the Qatari national team before taking on the Algerian national team. And with them, he's had incredible success. He hasn't lost a game in 2 years. He won them the 2019 Africa Cup of Nations, and they simply look invincible at the moment, and it's all due to him. He's not only a shrewd tactician, but he's also a great man manager. And I believe someone like him, for example, could easily coach at a club like Marseille or a smaller, for example, Premier League club. And though Cissé and Belmadi are the most likely candidates to really break through that glass ceiling and coach at a top European club, there are other candidates. For example, Walid Regragui, who's coaching at El Duhail in Qatar. He was coaching at not a small club in Morocco, but smaller than the powerhouses of Casablanca, and he did a fantastic job instituting a great style of play. And he really is a tough man manager as well. And he's proving his dues in Qatar, getting his pro coaching license, and I could see him coaching in Europe and maybe with the Moroccan national team soon. You also have Sunday Oliseh from Nigeria, who did a great job with Fortuna Sittard, basically helping them to promotion before being unceremoniously fired. He's also coached the Nigerian national team and could probably take on a top European club as well. Radi Jaidi spent a handful of years at one of the best academies in England at Southampton. I could see him definitely coming into maybe a smaller European club that really has a smaller budget and is looking to maybe help form younger players, kind of like what Eddie Howe did at Bournemouth. I could definitely see Radi Jaidi in that role as well. And you also have Omar Daf from Senegal, who actually has had a fantastic coaching career so far with Sochaux. He was actually hired as an interim coach in Ligue 1, but not a permanent coach. Because he didn't have his coaching diploma yet. But now he has that in place. He's coaching in Ligue 2 with Sochaux in France, and he's definitely paid his dues as well, and he could definitely coach a Ligue 1 club. Why not? So those are the dual citizens. But even in Africa, you have coaches like Pitso Moseman from Mamelodi Sundowns. He's been responsible for them completely dominating the South African PSL and even being quite successful in the African Champions League. And you also have coaches like the Congolese Florent Ibenge, who had great success with the Congolese national team and could probably try his chance, at a smaller European club to sort of ease his way in. So hopefully you understand a little more of the issues that are facing these African coaches. I believe that we're closer to breaking that glass ceiling than ever before. And with this young crop of African coaches, I really do believe that it's only a matter of time before we see our first African coach breaking that ceiling and coaching at a top European league in the first division.